I wrecked my car last October. This isn't a story about that. That was just garden variety terrifying. I try not to remember that sick feeling in the pit of my stomach as I realized I was sliding out of control. The way time slowed before I hit the concrete wall on the right side of the on-ramp, and the long moment before I slammed into the left wall and stopped. It's a strange and disconnected feeling to be aware that you're screaming, "Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit," but only with your body. My mind was spinning above everything in a weird, stretched sense of how wrong it all felt. Again, it was the pit of my stomach. Maybe my inner ear. Whatever it was, until the moment of impact, when the airbag exploded in my face, the world felt far away and detached, and nothing was okay. Then I hit, and there I was again, in my body, black eye and aching chest and coughing from whatever dust airbags release when they explode, and shitty as they were, things made sense again. Didn't mean to get that detailed. The point is, I don't have a car anymore. I do still have a job. Since it's not a very good job, there was no replacing the car. I had to explore other modes of transportation. I am fortunate to live in a fairly large city. I am unfortunate in that, as in most American cities, public transit here is absolutely shit. I'm afraid to ride a bicycle. Yeah, shut up. I had some really traumatic nightmares about it in my formative years, so I had to learn the bus system. Buses are known to suck. They smell, the people on them smell, they're too late or too early, or they don't come at all. They're either so crowded that you end up snugglier with your random neighbors than you ever were with most of your exes, or so empty you imagine the echoes of the two other people there breathing. Close your eyes so that you can't see them, turn up your music and you know you can't hear them, that is just your imagination. And you imagine their gazes trickling over your skin, you spin sordid histories and murderous tendencies, and you know they're just tired waiters on the way home from second shift jobs, or college kids swaying slightly on the way home from bars, or anyone really. Just people. And you know they're just as scared of you as you are of them, and that's why you all avert your eyes and hide in stupid games on your phones. You know there's nothing sinister going on, you all do, and you're almost always right. My habitual bus at the time was the 4. It stopped 2 blocks from my house and 4 blocks from work. It didn't run all night, and it cut back to every half hour before my graveyard shift started. So I could either be 20 minutes early or 10 minutes late. I didn't like ghosting around the halls forever before I could clock in, but job, so I always took the earlier one. On December 17th, I missed it. I was half a block away when I saw it zipping by. I ran, but it was rainy and there weren't many streetlights, and either the driver didn't see me or he didn't care. I hadn't paused to grab my umbrella as I dashed out the door, so I trudged home dripping, slumped, calling my coworker and apologizing profusely for the fact that I was going to be late. She didn't sound happy. I wasn't either. I was back at the stop 15 minutes later. I had no intention of missing the next bus too. It was the last one of the night, and I couldn't afford a cab or the time it would take one to get to me if I called. And good thing too. The unpredictable bastard pulled up to the curb just as I got to the stop. 30 seconds more and I would have missed it. This was one of the old buses, the ones with the greenish fluorescence that had been converted to electricity late and poorly. Sparks showered down from the wire above as it stopped, and again as it lurched forward before I had made it to a seat. I collapsed in the aisle seat a few rows back and pointedly did not look at the man I had seen sitting in back as I scanned my pass at the door. Even on a city bus, there is such a thing as etiquette. The familiar feeling of being watched. I ignored it. I got off at my stop. I groveled a little bit at Jackie, who was, as always, sweeter than the situation merited. I have no idea how she deals with demanding hotel guests all day and still never seems to want to throttle anyone. In some ways, I want to be Jackie when I grow up. Instead, I was me and I got to work. I'm a night auditor and things didn't balance that night, and I lost myself in figuring out what was wrong and how to fix it. Of course, I forgot about the imaginary stare of the random guy on the bus. It wasn't out of the ordinary after all. I had to stand sardine-packed for most of the ride home. Everyone else was going to work, and the guy in the awful tie grinding surreptitiously against my ass annoyed me much more than whoever it was I hadn't looked at directly the night before. I walked home, and as usual, I drank myself to sleep. I woke up thrashing in the dark and grabbed in a panic for my phone. This is not abnormal in the winter. It's as dark as it's going to get by 6 p.m. in December here. I have a half second to groggily reassure myself of that before my finger hit the button and the phone flashed 10:12. Fuck. How had I slept for 12 hours straight? At least that night, I was relieving Brianna, who was 16 kinds of bitch to begin with. I still leapt out of bed and slipped into my uniform, and I still didn't get close enough to a toothbrush before I ran out the door. Even half awake, I was clear-headed enough to thank whatever pallid lucky stars I might have left that I hit the curb 30 seconds before the bus pulled up. I rubbed the remains of yesterday's mascara into my eye sockets as I tried to shake myself. It isn't a difficult job once you know it, but you do still have to be coherent enough to check in the last few arrivals. It was several stops before the blood stopped pounding in my ears and left space for the thrum of the bus's engine, the buzz of the dying light bulbs, and the hiss of the sparks at every intersection. And behind it all, a calm, slow pulse of breath. I couldn't have been imagining it. I was still too asleep to be my usual degree of paranoid. I could have been half dreaming it. I wasn't sure. I lifted my eyes, looked out of their corners toward the right, toward the back of the bus. Someone was there, and I was sure it was him. And in flagrant disregard of the unwritten rules of the bus, he was staring right at me. Even at the edge of my peripheral vision, I could see the stark blank whites of his eyes, and dead in the centers, a vast round void of black. Black circles boring into the side of my face. I whipped my head forward and decided Brianna could suck it and yank the cord. I leapt into the rain 3 blocks early, but who cared? I wear sensible heels to work. I ran in the rain until I could only hear my heartbeat again, blocking out the calm, measured breathing still rasping in my ears. That's about when I started setting 5 or 6 alarms per night. I made sure I was at the bus stop at 10:05 at latest. I had no intention of missing the 10:17 bus again. I worked Christmas Eve with Frank, which was fantastic. He was about to retire, and I brought him a bottle of scotch. And Christmas with Eric, which was fine. The holiday bus schedule was severely clipped, of course, and full of harassed people with absurdly late presents. The stink of human sweat comforted me. I wasn't proud of that fact. Seriously, I told myself, it was just some guy. He had dark eyes, so what? Lots of people had dark eyes. The majority of humans have dark eyes. This did not mean that in the quiet week between Christmas and New Year's, when life didn't quite go back to normal, but bus schedules pretended they had, I was prepared to be late. And I wasn't. But it didn't matter. December 28th. I was earlier than usual, huddled under the corner under my umbrella, poking at the One Bus Away app. It had become increasingly inaccurate lately, sticking at 7 minutes away until I'd already been on the bus for 5, or telling me the 4 had passed 5 minutes before it turned the corner a block before my stop. This was another one of those nights. One Bus Away predicted through whatever magic 8-ball it was using that day that the bus was 2 minutes slow, but it shuddered into view 12 minutes early. Good thing I was there. It's always rainy in Seattle in the winter. Water pulled around the tip of my umbrella as I scanned my Orca card. I glanced at the screen. I knew I needed to add more money soon, but I wasn't sure when I'd run out. Flat orange, old buses. I sighed and rued my accident again. Seriously, always keep up on your tires. Fucking winter rains. I don't actually remember what I was thinking of at the time. My eyes were on my phone, Was it an email? A text? All I know is that the bus juddered forward fast enough to push me to the back, and irregularly enough that I couldn't catch hold of any of the poles on the way and swing myself into a seat. I kept my balance well enough to stumble to the back row and collapse into a seat there, directly beside the only other person on the bus, which is a huge violation of the rules of public transit. He didn't seem to mind. He turned toward me and grinned and grinned. I felt like I was still falling. I felt a lurching sweep to the right as I stared into his wide white-yellow smile, and then a sweep to the left. I felt unreal as I looked into his eyes, glistening white surrounding a vast round void of black. This close, I could see that the edges were red-eyed. My stomach dropped through the floor, through the ground, through a hole in Earth's fiery mantle, and everything was wrong. It felt like the accident. I felt his breath on my face. "I'm so glad to see you here," he whispered. I shuddered. I'm glad not to be alone. The bus kept going. The bus wasn't stopping. There had to be other people waiting. It was late. It was the holidays. But there had to be someone else, didn't there? "I don't know if you've noticed me," he said. "I've noticed you." I closed my eyes and barely nodded. His breath was strangely sweet. "Good," he said. "Have you noticed his bus never comes at the right times? And have you noticed the lights?" I thought my stomach had dropped before. I didn't know what he was talking about. My eyes snapped wide. I nodded more certainly this time. He leaned in, teeth bright in the dying fluorescent flicker. "Have you noticed the driver?" I hadn't. Most days, the 4 was driven by a cheery, gregarious, bearded man of indeterminate age who seemed to know everyone else who got on and chattered with them gleefully. Bus drivers have different rules. Bus drivers are safe. Sometimes it was a big, quiet man who grunted answers at any questions passengers asked. And twice it had been a high-strung blonde woman who looked more inclined to use fists than words at anyone who spoke to her at all. But this one I hadn't noticed. I had never looked. I had avoided it. Rules were rules. I shook my head. "Don't," he said. It was final, like a tombstone is final. I found my voice. "Okay," I said in a shaky whisper. The only passenger on the bus with me smiled. "You should get off now," he said, reaching casually toward the wire on the wall. "And watch for the lights. Any bus like this, never get on it again." He grinned at me again. It was just a grin, and his eyes were just eyes. As he pulled the cord, as the bus screeched to a halt, he raised his other hand and stroked my cheek, and his eyes sunk in at the edges, and suddenly the only smell on the bus was despair. The bus had stopped. The door had opened. The man at the back of the bus sat still. "Come with me," I whispered and grabbed his hand. He looked so sad. He looked so trapped. I stood and I tugged and I didn't let go. "I can't," he sighed. "But isn't this your stop?" I said it loudly so the bus driver would hear, so he wouldn't shut the door and drive away. "No," he sighed. "This isn't my stop." He opened his black eyes and his gaze hammered into mine. He placed a hand on the flat of my back and shoved. I staggered off balance toward the door and down the stairs and ended up on the sidewalk. I stared into the flickering green of the ailing fluorescence, but he was just a blur now through the sheeting rain. And then the lights in the bus went out. I ran past it as it sat steaming in the uncharacteristic downpour, and as I passed the front, I made the mistake of glancing in. I saw the driver. I can't emphasize that quite right. I saw him. I saw him? I saw a pulsing darkness. I saw what's under the crawl space. I saw everything dead. I saw what was under death. I saw what could have happened in the middle of October on the on-ramp to I-90 in the earliest of the year's winter rains, and my stomach dropped forever. The air brakes hissed and the bus started forward again, and I finally drew a ragged breath. There was a brief black blotch in the sickly green, a flash of white teeth and a glimmer of white eyes around a pool of blackness, and then in a shower of sparks, they were gone. The next day, I called in sick and bought a bicycle. The day after that, I was off anyway, and I worked on remembering how to ride it. It wasn't much of a fear, after all things considered. And of course, I still sometimes have to ride the bus, but I've changed the rules. Now I smile at all the other passengers and even at the driver when the bus is crowded. They actually seem to like it. And sometimes on nights off, I sit in the darkness behind the stop, hoping to see those sickening, flickering green lights again. I tell myself I would chase the bus down. I would scan my pass and walk straight to the back, and I would pull the wire as I held his hand, and I would drag him off with me. But I know I wouldn't. It's not only that I wouldn't have the guts to board that bus again, though that is certainly true. It's that I can't help but wonder, what did he do that he stuck on that bus forever? I might find out if I got back on. But Brianna would probably kill me if I was late to work again.
My commute to and from work is fucking dreary. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. 4 hours daily, I'm stuck on a train. The seats are uncomfortable and the temperature is either too hot or too cold. They can't seem to get the fucking thing sorted. But worst of all is the people. I have a thing about personal space, and public transportation doesn't play very well with that particular type of anxiety. You've probably seen that joke about personal space in Finland. Well, Norway is no different. If you can keep at least an arm's length distance, you do it. If there's an empty double seat, you take it. You don't fucking sit next to someone you've never met if you can avoid it. Talking to strangers on the train is a definite breach of the social contract. These are the rules, and they're not that fucking hard to follow. Mostly it went fine, you know? I'd hate it, but I would manage. I'd just put my headset on and fall asleep most days, waking up a few stations from my stop, and that would be it. But there's no fucking way I'm doing that anymore. I was heading home after pulling the afternoon shift. As always, the train was jam-packed, but it would gradually empty as we got closer to my station. Usually, there would only be a handful of people left at that point. I managed to find a window seat in the middle cart and slouched down tiredly. An elderly man sat down next to me, so I just turned to the window and cranked up the volume on my headset to max. After the conductor took his rounds checking the tickets, I must have fallen asleep. I remember having the strangest dream, but I've never been able to describe it. It was like an emotion or a sensation or something, like a feeling of being cold, broken, and scared, full of anguish and despair. And it went on forever. It was like I was trapped in that dream, like I didn't want to wake up regardless of how bad it felt. I've never quite understood it, but it was like something was trying to prevent me from regaining consciousness. I had to struggle to wake up, like you would from sleep paralysis. Just force yourself to snap out of it. I came to with an aggressive jolt, completely covered in sweat. The train was too hot this particular day, it would seem. A tall man sat next to me, his face concealed by the hood of his jacket. He was fiddling with what appeared to be a leather-bound notebook. I gazed out the window idly. There were still a few stops before my station. I sighed. My back was killing me, and I desperately needed to get out of there. I looked around the cart, and it was then I noticed it. It was fucking empty. This guy had fucking loads of empty seats to choose from, yet he decided to sit on the one next to me? He was breaching the fucking social contract. I did my best to control my anger, but I think I let out several disgruntled sighs and shifted my position furiously to get my point across. He didn't seem to notice. He just sat there, stroking the fine leather of his notebook. It was just such a strange thing to do. I was utterly perplexed. I heard the crackling static from the speaker system a few minutes later. They were announcing the next stop, the last one before mine. I sighed again, still 10 minutes to go. I secretly hoped the guy would just up and leave. He suddenly turned to me just before the train reached the station and opened his notebook. "Pick one," he said, his voice dark and broody. "I'm sorry, what?" I responded weakly. He pointed to the open notebook. 3 strange cards were on display on the first page. They looked like old tarot cards, but the images were black and white, and frankly, they freaked me the fuck out. "Choose wisely," he said. I still couldn't make out his face from under the hood. I shifted uneasily in my seat. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." I swallowed deeply. "Choose," he just repeated, pointing aggressively to the cards. I looked at the cards again. The first one looked like an image from an old book, maybe 17th century, and depicted a grisly scene where a man hung from a tree while a demon was removing a smaller person, possibly a child, from his abdomen. The image of the second one looked a bit newer, showing a white-clad woman carried by a human skeleton floating over a graveyard. The last one looked like an old black and white photograph of a human skull in profile. "Last chance," he whispered hoarsely. The unspoken indication of the word sent shivers down my spine. With a trembling finger, I just pointed to the last card. He nodded and took the card from the notebook. "Fine choice," he said as he handed me the card. The train pulled into the station and the man closed the notebook and stood up. Without so much as a word, he just walked out of the train. I let out a massive relief of sigh and just sank down in my seat. That was some fucked up shit, I thought. Some crazy fucked up shit. I was extremely cautious the rest of that week. I always sat in the front and never allowed myself to sleep. I never saw the man again, but I couldn't let it go. It was just so absurd. That sort of thing just stays with you, you know? That feeling of utter discomfort and uncontrollable fear. A few weeks later, I got to work a little late because of some delay with the trains. I was expecting some lip from my boss, but he seemed preoccupied with something, nose deep in his computer monitor. "Sarah, come look at this." I walked over to his monitor and he pointed to the news article he was reading. Some woman had gone missing overnight and the police were asking for any witnesses in the area to report to them. They couldn't rule out foul play, but they also had to consider other possibilities. There was a picture in the article showing the last location she was seen, just outside her apartment. I let out a horrified scream and stumbled back. "Sarah," my boss yelled, "what is it? What's wrong?" In the window of the apartment, you could clearly see it, placed neatly behind the curtains. A black and white tarot card showing a white-clad woman carried by a human skeleton floating over a graveyard. I rode the bus to school from the time I was in kindergarten until I was 16 and started driving myself to school. The one exception to that was a month when I was 9 years old, in which my mother drove me instead. That month began on November 3rd, 2003. After November 3rd, the school didn't have a bus to drive us to school in. More importantly, they didn't have a driver. Up until November 3rd, our school owned only one school bus. It was your traditional number 2 pencil yellow bus that seated 36 screaming elementary school kids. The bus picked my older brother and me up every morning from our neighborhood bus stop, which was about a block away from our house. I could just barely see my house from where we would stand when we waited for the bus. Nobody got picked up at our bus stop except for my brother and I, but the bus came by anyway. I don't remember riding on the school bus very well, but I remember my elementary school bus driver. His name was Thomas Blackford. Nobody called him that though. Everybody called him Mr. Tom. Mr. Tom was a big, fat man with a great gray beard and a bald head. He had one of those comfortable smiles that you'd expect Santa Claus to have. He always played the radio stations that we liked, and on the last day of school, he gave everyone who rode the bus a bag of candy to take home. Everybody who rode the bus loved Mr. Tom. I guess I should tell you now, Mr. Tom is dead. He died in 2003. He was murdered.
I don't know exactly when he was killed, but it was sometime in early November. This is the story of November 3rd, the day I didn't get on the bus. I was in second grade. Because the 3rd was a Monday, my brother and I hadn't ridden on the bus since the Friday before. It started like any Monday morning. That is, it started with my mom banging on the door to the bedroom that my brother and I shared and yelling, "If you don't get out of bed in the next 5 minutes, you're going to miss the bus. And there's no way I'm driving you to school." It gets pretty cold here in November, so my brother, Brian, and I had no intention of trying to walk to school. I slipped out from between my covers, groaning as I went. I got dressed and brushed my teeth. It was cold that day. I remember shivering as I slipped my blue down coat on over my shoulders. I always hated waiting for the school bus when it was cold out, especially if it had been snowing. Unfortunately for me, not only had it been snowing all morning, it was still snowing. There was about 3 inches of wet, slushy snow covering the street in front of my house, and more on the way. The second I opened the door so Brian and I could leave, I was struck by a gust of frigid wind that blew wet, stinging snow into my eyes. I was already shaking by the time I stepped outside. Like I said, you could see the bus stop from my house. It was only about a block away, but in that weather, that block felt like it could have been a mile. Before I could suggest to my brother that we shouldn't wait for the bus in such conditions, my mother yelled, "Close that door, you're letting the cold air in." I didn't grow up in the kind of house where you argued with the comment like that. Brian quickly shut the door behind him, pulled his hat down over his ears, and trudged past me through the dirty snow that lined the sidewalk. I followed Brian, who was grumbling quietly under his breath. The school bus usually arrived sometime around 8:30. When Brian and I got to the bus stop, it must have been a little before that, based on what I remember. Sometimes the bus got to our stop a minute or two late, so we weren't surprised to have to wait a few extra minutes. Looking back now, everything would have been different if it wasn't snowing. My brother and I shook in the freezing snow and waited for the bus to pull around the corner at the intersection to the south of us. At around 8:35, I could feel my toes growing numb. My teeth were audibly chattering. I wondered if we had already missed the bus. I didn't wear a watch then, I was too young, but Brian had a cheap old Timex watch that Mom had gotten him. "Brian, did we get here late?" "No, the bus is just running a little late." I frowned. Brian was not a morning person. "Are you sure? I don't think Mr. Tom has been this late before." "Yes, I'm sure. Be quiet." My hands were beginning to lock up from the cold. I could feel the joints in my fingers turn stiff and tired. Despite my down coat, I was shaking all over my body. That's why I felt so relieved when I saw our bus as it turned the corner at the bottom of our street and slowed as it pulled toward us. I was finally going to be in the heated bus where my frozen body could thaw. I couldn't wait for Mr. Tom to open the door and greet us with a hearty good morning and a warm grin. But when the door opened, there was no warm grin. There was no Mr. Tom. When the door to our bus opened, I didn't see the husky frame sitting behind the wheel of the bus that I expected. I saw a small, thin man sitting on the seat. He had the bus driver's uniform on him, but it didn't fit right. It looked too big, like he was completely engulfed in it. His hair was thinning and covered in grease and dirt, not shiny and smooth like Mr. Tom's bare head. The driver's smile filled his whole face. His teeth were yellowed and his gums brown and black. The most striking thing I remember about his face, however, were his eyes. They were huge, and his pupils were dilated so large that they almost completely covered the irises of his eyes. "Where's Mr. Tom?" I asked hesitantly as I climbed onto the first step, leading up to the bus. He called in sick today." The man spoke softly and with a disconnected rhythm. It sounded like he was straining to produce the words. I looked past him and saw that there were only a few children sitting in their seats on the bus, only 3 or 4. Usually the bus was almost full by the time it got to our stop. "Where is everybody, mister?" I was getting nervous, but the bus was so warm that I was drawn towards it. Brian, who was standing behind me on the sidewalk, complained loudly, "Will you just get on? It's cold out here." "Well, mister, where is everyone?"
Not sure. Guess they must be sick. His smile slowly faded and his lips curled into a cartoonish frown. Better get on. I think we're a little late. I was still nervous, but I was only 9, young enough not to question something that an adult had told me. I put my foot on the second step of the bus and started to move forward. The bus driver's dopey frown transformed into that sick smile almost instantly as I started to move forward. I was only a few feet from him when I felt a strong hand grab my shoulder from behind. I was pulled back to the sidewalk by a tall woman in a bathrobe. Before I could protest or try to resist, I realized it was my mother. She had her arms wrapped around Brian and I, and she was pulling us away from the bus. "Mom, what's wrong?" Brian asked as she pulled him and me closer to her. "Who are you?" she stammered at the driver. The driver's face quickly melted back into a frown and his giant eyes narrowed. He didn't say anything to her. "What do you think you're doing? Who are you?" my mom insisted. Her voice was shrill and full of confusion. The driver didn't reply. Instead, the same horrible smile from before spread back over his face. He pulled the lever that closes the door and stepped on the gas. The bus moved forward quickly and made a sharp right turn at the end of our block. My brother, mother, and I stood in the snow, shivering, watching the bus slide slightly as it careened around the corner. Before we could ask any questions, my mother pulled my brother and I back to the house. She was frantic. Her skin looked pale, especially in her dark purple bathrobe. She looked nervous, almost scared. She just kept saying, "Hurry up, get inside." She herded Brian and I inside and sat us down at the dining room table. "Stay here," she warned. Brian and I were confused, and our mother's visible fear had made me scared as well. All sorts of thoughts ran through my head. Maybe Grandpa had another heart attack. Or maybe Brian and I had gotten in trouble for something. Why else would Mom walk all the way out to the bus stop and stop us from getting on the bus? Brian and I listened as she called the school district from the kitchen. I could just barely make out what she was saying. The bus was definitely out there. No, it wasn't the usual driver. She listened intently to whoever was on the other side of the line. After a moment, she said, "Okay, I will." She hung up the phone and began to dial another number. "What's going on?" Brian asked. "Not now, Brian. I need to talk to the police." Our mom stayed on the line with the cops for almost 20 minutes. Brian and I looked at each other in silence as our mom told the officer on the phone about the man we saw driving the bus. I would learn several days later that while my mom was talking on the phone, the new bus driver picked up 5 more children. The bus, which had 8 total children on it, all between the ages of 7 and 12, would abandon its normal route at 8:52 a.m. after its 12th scheduled stop and drive onto local Highway 78. The driver would accelerate to over 100 miles per hour, according to eyewitness reports. The bus would begin violently weaving in and out of its lane, coming close to hitting several different vehicles who would later call 911 to report its erratic behavior. At approximately 9:17 a.m., despite the desperate pleas of the crying children aboard the bus, it would drive onto the only bridge in Gilliman County. It would cross about half of the bridge. According to the bridge's caretaker, Chris Lopez, Mr. Lopez would later tell reporters that the bus made a violent right turn at the center of the bridge. He would explain that he could see the terrified face of a little girl screaming from one of the windows as the bus broke through a metal guardrail and fell into the icy river. The official police report would state that all 9 bodies were found dead. The bus had crashed into the ice at the top of the river and floated approximately a mile before it became stuck on a patch of rocks and a downed tree. All of the occupants of the bus had intense bruising, blood loss, and broken bones. The police officer who went to the home of Thomas Blackford to ask him about the incident would find his door unlocked and the inside of his home completely trashed. When looking in his bedroom, they would find his corpse horribly mutilated. The Gilliman County coroner would tell reporters that Mr. Tom was most likely murdered by an intruder while he slept. The cops would find that his bus driver's uniform and keys to the bus had been stolen. This is all the information I've been able to find about the day that I almost got on that bus. There's probably a lot more information out there about November 3rd, but I imagine a lot of it hasn't been released to the public. I've read almost every newspaper story, eyewitness report, and police document that I could bring myself to. None of it has answered the question that I can't stop asking myself. Why wasn't I on the bus? I was a step away from joining the kill count of that horrible little man who murdered Mr. Tom and those 8 children. I was so close to dying in that crash. I still wake up in the middle of the night imagining that little girl's crying face as the fender struck the ice, going God knows how fast. I can't stop imagining the way the driver's disgusting smile as he drove the bus off that bridge. My survival haunts me. Why wasn't I on the bus? The closest thing I have to an answer to that question was what my mom told me when she got off the phone with the officer that morning on November 3rd. I asked her, "Mom, why'd you stop us from getting on the bus?" Tears started filling her eyes as she told Brian and me the truth. The school called. Today is a snow day. The bus shouldn't have been running at all.
I'm terrified of getting sick. I caught the swine flu one time when I was little and I nearly died. After that incident, my immune system has been permanently damaged, and my doctor warned me that even minor illnesses could hospitalize me or kill me. Never again. After my close encounter with death, I never went more than an hour or 2 without washing or sanitizing my hands in some way. Whenever I'm in public spaces, I try to stay as far away from people as possible and to touch as few surfaces as possible. I even wear a dust mask over my face, especially on the metro and other forms of public transportation. I am paranoid about being sick. I want no part in it whatsoever. So you could understand that my first ever ride in an airplane was stressful to me, to say the least. My brother was getting married, and I hadn't had a chance to see family in several years, so I decided to fly out of necessity. Security and the terminal itself immediately had me on edge. Crowds and crowds of people being in a relatively small area had me on high alert. My face mask was on before I even entered the building, so that comforted me somewhat. Boarding the plane was the worst part for me, though. The plane was fairly large as far as I'm concerned. 4 rows of 3 seats each went on and on down the plane. Oh, and did I mention that my flight was going to be 8 hours nonstop? Yeah, that is an important detail. Then I boarded and found my seat, almost smack dab in the middle. I politely asked the flight attendant if my seat could be reassigned. The flight attendant said she would see if anyone would be willing to move. The flight attendant didn't come back, and I was forced to be seated in the middle row. We hadn't even taken off yet when the coughing first started. A slightly overweight middle-aged man began to cough and cough, trying and failing to cough into his arms and hands. He stood up. A flight attendant told him that we were taking off and that he should be seated, but he didn't listen. He began to make his way to the middle of the plane where a restroom was located, coughing and gagging the whole time he walked. After almost 20 minutes, the man left the restroom and began to make his way back to his seat, all the while still coughing on everyone unlucky enough to be in his path. Fortunately for me, he passed on the aisle across from me, but he was still facing me, so I managed to get a good look at him. His skin was pale white, The area surrounding his eyes was pink and irritated. Sweat dripped down his forehead. His hair and shirt were messy, and he staggered as he walked. When he got closer, I was able to hear his confused mumbling. No words were spoken, just noises and syllables making a gurgling sound coming out of his throat. A flight attendant helped him into his seat and asked if he was all right. I heard his wife, I assume it was his wife, explain that he had the flu and that they'd see a doctor at the end of their flight. The flight attendant seemed satisfied but gave the man a mask similar to my own. The man must have fallen asleep for a few minutes because the coughing ceased for a few short minutes. Then, abruptly, he stood up and rushed to the restroom once more. For the few minutes he was inside, I began to hear more coughing. Several people had began coughing the same wet, sick cough the man had been coughing. Minutes later, the man burst from the restroom and began to frantically move to the back of the plane. His face was blood red this time. His eyes were oozing dark red blood. His mask was stained from the inside with more blood. He reached his hands to his throat and began to gag as if he were choking. Seconds later, he hit the floor with a violent slam. Someone quickly ran to the man's aid from the nearby seat. He began attempting CPR on the man. It was clear no progress was being made. His wife was holding her husband's nearly dead body and sobbing. In all of the confusion, his mask must have slipped off. His dust mask that was the only thing between the air we breathe and his infected lungs had somehow fallen off. The men continued CPR, but only after a few seconds, blood erupted from the man's mouth and nose. The sick man then began to shake and twitch for about 30 seconds before finally going limp forever. The man who had attempted CPR and the sick man's wife were both covered in the blood from the sick man. They dragged the corpse to the back of the plane with the assistance of a flight attendant. Fear and panic were like a thick cloud in the air. Things really started serious when dozens of other people started coughing. Everything got out of hand so quickly, it was a blur. Where the first man took about 20 to 30 minutes to die, plus the time he was infected before entering the plane, the people he coughed on started having seizures and vomiting blood all over surrounding passengers in 5 minutes or less. I ran past several people and went to the front staff bathroom and locked the door. In the next hour or so, people banged on the door and begged to let us be let into the cockpit. The final people left alive ended their begging with a desperate gurgle as they drowned in their own bodily fluids in a slow, painful death. It was difficult to open the door to the restroom, with so many corpses piling up in the hallway, but I managed to make a gap big enough to fit through. The sight of the passenger area was revolting. People piled up in the walkways were literally stacked on top of each other. Other passengers were still strapped into their seats in a pool of their own blood. I quickly removed my shirt to tie around my face for extra protection. I knocked on the captain's cabin. "Don't you realize what has happened? Land the damn plane," I shouted through my face masks. "Don't open the damn door. Stay back," I heard someone shout from the other side of the door. "I'm not infected, but we will all die soon if you don't land soon. Every single person on this plane is dead or dying," I shouted back. I heard them murmur to each other before one of them responded. "We're going to land in Atlanta, but you're going to have to stay on board because you could be infected." "What do you mean? If I was infected, I'd be dead by now. I'm covering my face with a cloth and I don't know if it will work for much longer. How long until Atlanta?" "We're 10 minutes out," they said. Then they left me in silence. I decided that going back in the bathroom was probably the best idea, so I didn't have to be near the blood and corpses. We landed. I opened the door and looked towards the captain's cabin to see the captain and co-pilot making their way out the emergency exit, with the look of disgust and terror on their faces. "Stay the hell back," they shouted at me. "We're going to go get help, and you need to stay here so you don't get anyone else sick," he said with the voice of authority. I followed them to the emergency door and inhaled a deep breath of fresh air. Within minutes, 3 unmarked SUVs arrived and men in biohazard suits made their way toward me. I was escorted to one of the SUVs where I was closely examined and tested for about 30 minutes. The police showed up next, along with several other government agencies. A few men in black suits came up to the pilots and they started talking. I watched in horror as the pilot covered his mouth as he coughed, and the men in the black suit recoiled away from him.
The suited man called for the biohazard team to detain them, but before they could reach the pilots, they were running towards the loading and unloading terminal.
My car got utterly wrecked. No saving it, mashed up to bits. My sister had borrowed it and cheated death that day. Even after looking at the heap of scrap metal that was my car, I had no idea how she got out with only a few broken bones. By all rights, she should have died. But that was my sister. She has the best luck. She married a good guy with a decent amount of money for them to live comfortably. The day of the accident, they had taken their car in to get the snow tires switched to all-season ones. Her job wanted her to come in for an extra shift. She almost refused, but I lent her my car for the day. I was so thankful for having my sister, I didn't even think about I now had to take the bus for work. Thankfully, my boss let me have the weekend off after seeing photos of the crash. He also had no idea how my sister lived. I took care of things while she was in the hospital and soon found out city transportation isn't reliable. It arrives late, or too early, or not at all. Sometimes it's so packed you need to stand for the entire ride, and it takes forever. A city bus could take over an hour to get to a location that was only a 10-minute drive away. I sometimes could walk faster than the bus, but I couldn't afford getting a taxi to and from work. I thought about borrowing the bike, but it was still cold. During the day, it was fine, but I worked late into the night. Even just waiting for the last bus nearly froze me to death. Sure, it wasn't going to snow anymore, but I'm very sensitive to the cold. I just never adjusted to the climate after we moved further up north. So, no biking home. Aside from all that, the bus wasn't all that bad. I could get some reading in. I couldn't read while driving, and most books I enjoyed didn't have audiobooks. That's how I found myself on the last bus home after a week of missing my car. My sister was doing fine, and I could finally relax a little after a stressful week of being late to work because of my new form of transportation and losing an hour of sleep each night riding home. Because it was so late, it was only myself and the driver for most of the ride. I still had half the ride to go when the bus stopped to pick someone up. My nose buried inside my latest trashy romance, I didn't even look up to see who it was. Even with the empty bus, they sat in front of me. Odd, but I wasn't complaining. I took a quick glance up and noticed they were short and had bleach white hair. I glanced at my watch and groaned at how it was so close to midnight. I lived close to the bus depot, so that was lucky. Not every route had a bus running so late. I got off the second last stop. The bus normally turned its light off once I got off, so I knew it was out of service when I was within walking distance of home. In the past week, I had never seen anyone get on this late. I shrugged and went back to my book. Then another person got on, which was weird. I didn't think we had actually stopped, just paused at a red light, but I had seen kind bus drivers who picked up people if they tapped on the front door if the bus had stopped somewhere. This time I peeked up, but the person who got on was so tall, they crossed the bus fast. They were dressed in black and had passed me before I got a good look at them. I started to turn my head for a discreet peek, but a voice in front of me made me stop. Don't look at it. The voice was soft, and it sounded like it belonged to a child. I stared at the person in front of me instead of the one who just passed behind. It? I asked slowly. May I sit beside you? It was an odd request, but if I was talking to a child, I didn't see why not. Without waiting for an answer, the small child in front of me got up from the seat and walked to sit next to me. I was guessing it was a boy, but it's hard to be sure of children. He was wearing gender-neutral clothing, just a big gray sweater, jeans, and I was shocked to see no shoes. Why was he out so late? Where was his parents? Why was he missing his shoes? I had put the other person on the bus out of my mind as I looked over at the child. He finally raised his head to look at me, and under his long, wavy white hair, pink eyes stared at me. I had never seen someone who was albino before, aside from some photos. It was off-putting for a second, but I focused on the more important questions. What are you doing out so late? Do you have a guardian I can call? Are you hurt? And where are your shoes? Each question made him look slightly more annoyed.
He had a very neutral look, but his eyes narrowed just enough to make me stop and let him answer. In the past 6 months, 10 people have disappeared from this bus route. 4 have been bus drivers. Are you aware of this? He was speaking so softly he was hard to hear, but I got the idea. I had actually heard the stories in a way. I've overheard people at my job talking about some missing bus drivers on the last bus for the night. I've been so busy at work I never stopped to chat. I heard there was a post going around online about the rules to survive the last bus, but I, again, never cared enough to look it up. Aren't you too young to be scary story hunting? Is this for a video? You really should be in bed. I let out a sigh and put my book away in my bag. I was reaching for my cell phone to see how to report a missing child when he slouched in his seat. Fine. If you do not believe me, then look behind us at the figure sitting at the back of the bus. It's your life after all. He sounded a little like he was pouting, and strangely, a little too mature for his face. I gave him a confused look. What on earth did the other passenger on the bus have anything to do with this weird conversation? The bus stopped for a red light. Again, the driver looked in a mirror mounted at the front so he could see most of the bus. Since we were on an empty street, he felt safe enough to take his eyes off the road and look behind us. Hey, Missy, who is your friend, and when did he get on? I don't remember him at all. The driver said back to me, looking genuinely confused over the boy's presence. That made me look from the driver to the boy a few times. He was still soaking. I gave his arm a very light poke to make sure he was really there and the both of us weren't sharing a hallucination. I don't know who he is. He got on a few stops ago, like a few minutes before midnight. The driver looked even more confused. The light had turned green, so he started the bus back up just to pull off to the side of the street and out of the way in case any cars came past. Then he got out of his seat and started to walk towards us. I mean, he honestly looked like he had no memory of letting the albino boy on. And he was a child out in the middle of the night. It was a good idea to stop and try and figure out where he was going and why he was alone. Hey champ, what's your name? The man asked when he was a step or two away from us. The boy didn't look up to him though. He only flickered his eyes over towards me. You can scream as much as you want, but do not look behind us. The boy's statement was so weird, no one answered. The driver raised his head and finally seemed to look around the rest of the bus. Out of my sight, he spotted the other passenger, the tall figure dressed in black I hadn't paid any attention to. When did you get on? The driver's words were cut short. In a blur of motion, he was grabbed by long black arms and pulled back towards the rear of the bus so quickly, my brain didn't even realize what had happened. What I saw was impossible. The arms had just been too long black tubes with great clawed hands. On reflex, I almost looked behind me. Then I remembered how the boy had warned me about looking. I forced my head forwards as I heard it. The kind bus driver who had just been worried about a small child was screaming and begging for his life. Screaming that stopped suddenly with the wet crunch I wish I never heard.
Once I smelled a metallic odor, I was certain it was blood. I started to scream as well. I clutched the side of my head and hunched down in my seat, hoping it would keep me safe from those hands. I screamed and had to force myself to stop fearing they would make whatever just happened to the driver happen to myself. You can keep screaming. Once it's out of your system, I can tell you how to stay alive. The boy's voice had changed. I still knew it was his, but it sounded much more confident and much more like an adult. Far different than moments ago. I blinked away tears and looked at him, my body shaking, but I had to trust him. What is going on? I pleaded, praying to get an answer. If the last bus stops at a crossroad at midnight, a dark figure may enter the bus and sit at the back. Until it sits, you may look, but once it sits down, do not look at it. Do not turn your head. No matter what you hear, no matter anything else you experience. The moment you look, you become its target. The figure shall not leave until the bus finishes the route and is inside the depot. My entire body was screaming to just make a run for it. Even after the boy explained the situation, I just couldn't believe him. I wanted to just leave, but I could still smell the blood at the back of the bus. Still hunched over, I tried to think of a different way out. "What are you talking about? And who even are you?" I finally asked that question. I hadn't asked him for his name yet. Odd as it should have been one of my first questions. Better late than never. "You may call me Ellie. I am here to find out if this figure was the reason for the disappearances. I am not here to save you. I can only give you information. You must act and get yourself safely home." Now, how am I going to do that? That thing killed the driver. I hissed, and tears started to come back. I forced them down, not wanting to look weak in front of the boy. I was the adult, and he was the calm one. But after what I had just seen, I couldn't be blamed for losing my cool for a few seconds. "I know how to drive a bus. However, you need to be the one to do it. I'm too short to reach the pedals." Under his white hair, I saw a flash of red on his cheeks. It faded as he straightened up and stood. Completely fearless, he walked towards the front of the bus, not looking back at me. He just stood right next to the driver's seat and waited for me to join him. It took everything I had to finally stand up. I walked over on shaking legs, clutching my bag. Every step, I was certain I was going to be grabbed and ripped apart by those dark hands. Somehow, though, I made it to the front. I closed my eyes so I didn't look in any of the mirrors and blindly stumbled around until I found my way into the driver's seat. I don't know if I can do this. Those mirrors, I might accidentally look at them. After I spoke, I heard a sound that could only be described as those worrisome mirrors being ripped down and tossed aside. I opened my eyes, just enough to confirm that the mirrors were in fact torn off and gone from sight. I did not remove them to save you. They also bothered me. Understand? Ellie sounded suddenly very serious. I risked a dumbfounded side glance at him. He couldn't even reach the mirrors. How in the hell did he rip them off? He had no plan to explain it to me. "Can't I just leave?" I asked, shaking, staring forwards into the empty and dark road. "No. You will be unable to open the doors or windows. Until this bus finishes its route, you cannot leave." That was not at all good news. I had no choice but to learn how to drive a bus. After a crash course on how to start up the bus and how to drive one, we were off. Very, very slowly off. There were no cars around, so we should be fine at a snail's pace until I got used to the hulking thing. Ellie was true to his word about knowing how to drive a city bus. With him beside me, I thought I was going to make it out alive. Only for a few minutes. Soon it started to get cold. Ellie didn't look like he noticed. With his stone face, it was hard to tell if anything that was happening bothered him in the slightest. In a few seconds, the temperature dropped so low I could see puffs of my breath. With one arm, I pulled my work clothing from my bag and placed it over my lap, trying to use them as a makeshift blanket. We slowly followed the route back to the depot. I had taken this route enough over the week, I knew the way. I wanted to drive faster, but I was still not confident enough. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I shook in fear and from the cold. I almost couldn't take the cold. I wanted to give up even before the whispers came. Horrible whispers floating around, accusing me of being jealous of my sister, of wishing she had died. Whispers telling me to just look behind me, saying everything would be easier if I did. Tears started to flow down my face. If I wasn't going so slow and steady, I might have put us at risk of swerving and crashing. I jerked a little, but corrected it before hitting the curb.
I was so glad for the road being empty, but after a few minutes, I couldn't take it and almost just stopped when Ellie's voice came from beside me.
What are they saying? His voice was still as neutral as ever. Instead of sounding he was asking about ghostly whispers tormenting me, he sounded like he was asking for the weather report. They're saying I'm jealous of my sister. My teeth were chattering from the cold. I couldn't say much more. So, you can be jealous of her, and you can still love her, right? Say it back to the voices, that you can have both emotions, that you are only human, weak, and yet very strong. His words held some truth in them. A warmth came back to me. It was still cold, but I could bear it. I found I could suddenly push through the voices around me. I could focus on the road and follow the route. We were so close to the depot. If I just pushed through for a few more minutes, I would be fine. I could go home. I repeated those words in my head. I would be fine. I could go home. I would be fine. I still loved my sister. I would be fine. Even though I was driving faster, those last few minutes felt like an eternity. But we finally arrived to the depot. I panicked for a few seconds, but Ellie's told me where to go. Oddly enough, everything was unlocked. The large garage door for the buses was open and dark. No one was around. I wondered if Ellie had anything to do with this. He was so clearly not human at that point. Child or not, he had to have something to do with the fact no one being ready to receive the last late bus. The moment I parked and shut the bus off, I let out the biggest sigh of relief. I was ready to leave, beyond ready. Don't move yet. Let me look first. I was a little annoyed at Ellie, but he was right. He had said that the dark figure would leave after the bus was in the depot, but it's best not to take risks. I looked sideways at him as he turned his head to look behind us. He stared, and I couldn't read the expression on his face. He was about to look back at me to give the all clear, but those long, dark claws came shooting out. In utter horror, I watched the claws rip through his shirt and into his stomach so hard they slammed his small body against the toll collector so hard it bent the metal. Ellie had a look of confusion. He didn't shout or cry out in pain. I reached out my hand to grab him, but was too slow. He was dragged out of sight and to the back of the bus. And I wasn't having any of it. I had seen a photo the driver had put up of his family. This man had people waiting for him, and that creature took him away. And now it broke the rules and snatched Ellie. In my rage, all my fear disappeared, and I closed my eyes and stumbled off of the driver's seat. I fumbled around and found one of the mirrors that had been ripped off the bus. I gripped it by the pole it had been attached to, the bus. I was surprised by its weight, but I still lifted it off the ground and made my way to the back of the bus, eyes still closed. I bumped into a lot of the seats and tripped over the 2 steps that led to the upper part of the bus. I honestly had no idea what I was going to do with the broken mirror. The driver had been killed seconds after he was grabbed. I had wasted so much time and feared Ellie was already gone. If that was the case, I would beat the dark figure with the heft mirror I picked up. It was a dumb idea, but I was so pissed off I wasn't thinking clearly. "Leave him alone, you piece of..." I was screaming, but stopped short when I heard a calm voice. "What are you doing?" It was Ellie's voice, but I still didn't dare open my eyes. It could be a trick. I debated on if I should just start swinging away, but my brave assault was stopped before it even started when the mirror was ripped from my hand. "You can open your eyes now. It's fine." I shouldn't have trusted it, but I had to see if Ellie was all right. Slowly, I cracked open my eyes just enough to see the boy sitting on the back seat with an empty black trench coated beside him.
His sweater had been torn, but I saw no blood. None of him or even the driver's blood I had smelled before. What the hell? I snapped at him, feeling pretty angry and confused. When something moved and fluttered around under the trench coat, I moved back. I can't go into too many details. You know those rules I told you earlier? The figure broke them. Not only did it take bus drivers, making it impossible to give riders a chance, it tried to kill me after we pulled in. I assume it would have killed you if I didn't demote it first. I need a whole lot of information, like what that thing is and what you mean by demote. Are you its boss? You actually don't deserve any information. You should just be leaving, but I shall tell you a little. I am not its boss. I am its king. I stifled a snicker. Ellie went on. This figure is a type of creature that must go by certain rules to take humans. The more humans it takes, the stronger it gets. The stronger it is, the rules it goes by change. If it finally gets strong enough, the final rule is just a human looking at it. But none really make it to that rank. They cheat, trying to get stronger faster. It's my job to find these troublemakers and knock them down a few ranks. I guess that makes sense. So I guess I'm lucky you came by to save me, huh? I did not save you. I gave you information. You drove the bus. You didn't look behind you. If you looked before I did, you would have been killed. You followed the rules this creature has been bound to. Ellie was giving me a hard look, but I could tell he was trying to act tough in front of the creature hiding under the trench coat. He was the one who offered to look first, but he was trying to act it as if I was the one who had made the choice. I didn't know what the big deal was. So what if he helped me out? But he was so adamant that I decided to drop it. I heard a noise behind me before I could really answer him and looked over to see that the bus back door had opened. When I looked back, only Ellie sat, but the black trench coat gone. You should go home now and forget this entire thing. Ellie got up and started to leave the bus, and I followed behind him. The bus depot was within walking distance of my place. I could easily get back home, but it would be impossible to forget what happened. A man died. I saw something unnatural, and I sort of stole a bus for a few blocks. I'm not going to be arrested for anything, am I? No, you'll be fine. Just go home. Ellie was about to walk away from me, but I couldn't let him go just yet. I had a spare light jacket in my bag, along with my work clothes. I stopped him and placed the jacket on his shoulders. It's cold out, and you got your sweater torn. You shouldn't be so kind to me. I used you as bait. Even if that was the case, I still forgave him. Because of him, I lived another night, no matter how much he wanted to deny it. He was very embarrassed after I gave him a big hug. He tolerated it, but soon was trying to struggle to get out of my arms. Don't ever talk to me again. With that quick dismissal, I watched him as he jogged across the street and away from me. I thought he was a good kid, but I had to agree. I never wanted to see him again. I didn't take the bus again. I spent a stupid amount on cab rides until I got a new car to drive to work.
I remember it like it was yesterday. I woke up late thanks to me forgetting to set my alarm the night before. When I saw 7:27 on my alarm clock, I sprang out of bed like a jackrabbit and began pulling my clothes on furiously. I needed to be at my bus stop by 7:35, so that meant I had no time to brush my teeth or eat breakfast today. No, I had forfeited those luxuries due to my little mistake. I hurriedly scooped my books and worksheets into my backpack and dashed down the stairs and out the front door. I hauled ass to get to the bus stop. Just as I rounded the corner, I could see the last kid getting on the bus. "Hey!" I yelled, but the kid didn't hear me. I hastened my sprint as the bus began pulling off, smoke pouring from the exhaust. "Hey!" I yelled again, waving my arms wildly. In the side mirror, I made eye contact with the bus driver. The driver had always been a stern old man, so I can't say that I was surprised to see him give me a dismissive look and shrug, as if to say, "Too late, kid." The driver sped up and I was left behind, dejected, listless, and without a mode of transportation. My school was about 20 minutes away from the bus stop. I had no money and had never ridden the public bus anyway. My 10-year-old mind was in a complete state of panic. I knew my mom would kill me once my teacher called and told her that I was skipping school. I sat down on the curb, sighing deeply. I still can't explain it exactly, but something didn't feel right. I had never felt this way before in my life, but something was just wrong. I felt a chill run down my spine, and it had nothing to do with the wind whipping around me. I was even more unsettled due to the fact that the wind sounded chillingly like agonized screams ripping through the air. I looked up and noticed the beat-up dirt brown pickup truck chugging slowly down the street towards me. I don't know why I didn't run at the sight of it. I merely sat and watched as the truck pulled up right next to me and came to a halt. The driver's side window was already rolled down, and I could see a wizened old man wearing a dirty red cap gazing out at me. He flashed me a toothless smile before speaking. "What's wrong, kid?" "I missed my bus," I said with an air of defeat. The man stared at me for a moment before responding. "You need a ride?" Yes, I had been taught to never talk to or accept rides from strangers. Still, I was a desperate 10-year-old who didn't want to get into trouble for missing school. "Yeah." I grabbed my backpack and walked over to the passenger door. I hopped in, slamming the door behind me. The inside of the man's truck was filthy. There were cans and old food packages on the floor, and the smell was overwhelming. I coughed and reached to let down the window. "Sorry, kid, that window doesn't work, and neither does the door from the inside." I looked at the man, who was looking at me intently. There was a little bit too much glee in his dark eyes, and I was beginning to feel very uncomfortable. He asked, "Where do you go to school?" And I told him. The man smiled again, then began driving. I looked up at his rearview mirror and saw what appeared to be a little girl's rainbow-colored bracelet hanging from it. My unease was out of control now, and though I tried to look away quickly, the old man caught me looking at it. "Oh, this? It was my daughter Jessica's. I think about her every day." He reached out and caressed the bracelet. I stared out the window, noticing that the man was going a completely different way than the bus driver usually did. "What happened to her?" I asked numbly. The old man was quiet for a few long seconds before answering. "Well, she passed away in a car accident. The roads are dangerous, you know, especially in this town." My heartbeat was increasing by the second. I wondered if the old man had been lying about the door not working. I was strongly considering yanking at it anyway. "How old are you, young lady?" 10? I replied quickly, trying to hide my nervousness, but failing. The old man stared blankly ahead in silence for a few more minutes. "Yeah, that's how old my Jessica was when she passed." He reached for my leg and I instinctively pulled it up. I felt my face turn red when I realized the man was merely reaching for a bag of open potato chips that had been lying on the seat next to me. "You okay?" he asked, popping some of the chips into his mouth. I nodded slowly, putting my foot back onto the floor. I looked out the window and felt relief pour through me like it never had before. We were on the street my school was on. How had we gotten here so quickly? The old man must have taken some kind of shortcut. The truck pulled to a slow stop in front of the school, and the old man hopped out. He walked over to my side and opened the door for me. I climbed out, looking up into his wrinkled face. "Thanks for the ride, mister." The old man nodded, giving me another smile. "No problem, sweetheart." He got back into the truck and drove away. I watched him go, wondering what the hell had just happened. What had my 10-year-old intuition been telling me?
This man was clearly harmless, or else I probably wouldn't be at school right now. I shook my head and walked into the building. To my bewilderment, all of the teachers were crying. I didn't find out why until a little while later. My bus had never made it to the school. A car had hopped unexpectedly into the bus driver's lane, and he had swerved hard, causing the bus to topple over the side of a bridge. There was no survivors.
I was recently in a pretty bad car wreck. I wasn't hurt too badly, but my car was totaled. I pretty much rely on tips for most of my income. I work at a restaurant, so I knew it would be a while before I was able to buy a new car. I decided on taking a bus to and from work, mainly because I didn't have any other choice. I've had some pretty bad experiences on buses, but nothing that ever legitimately scared me. Until last night. I was working late, as I often do because I need to earn as much extra money as I possibly can, and waited at the bus stop for what seemed like ages. At one point, I thought I heard my name being called, but I just chalked that up to me being drowsy. When the bus finally came, I was much more happy than I should have been. I got on and immediately noticed I was the only one there, save for one person sitting in the back. Not that uncommon because of how late it was. It was about midnight, but still a bit eerie for some reason. I sat down and tried to engage in conversation because I like talking to people. "Hey there." No response. So I just assume he is sleeping or just doesn't want to talk to me. I slowly drift off to sleep, but I'm woken up to my name being called. "Did you say something?" I ask, but again, no response. As I begin to fall asleep again, I see the person very slowly stand up and walk over to me. "Do you need something?" I ask. He says, "They're almost here," and goes to sit back down. "What? Who's almost here?" I ask, but you guessed it, no response. I'm not too frightened. I just assumed he was another drunk. They tend to say some weird-ass things. This time, I pretend to fall asleep, but secretly watch this guy to see what he would do. I see him pull out a cell phone and dial someone. He begins to whisper on the phone. I couldn't make out everything, but this is everything I remember. Yes, this is, "He's here, he'll perfect, ready, experiment." As he says the last word, he looks at me. I had forgotten that I was asleep and had my eyes wide opened. He shot me a look that struck fear into my soul and said on the phone, "Never mind, I can bring him in myself." And with that, he stands up and begins walking toward me. As he's walking, I see a gun tucked into his waistband. At this point, I run to the front of the bus to ask the bus driver to stop, and what I saw shocked me. There was no fucking bus driver. The seat was empty. I could have sworn there was one when I got on. I opened the doors and ran until I could run no more. I walked to work the next day. If Singapore was a person, our mass rapid transit system would be its arteries. About 3.1 million people move through the MRT every day. That's over half our population traveling through the network. I love that we have something like the MRT. Taxis are expensive. Driving is even more expensive somehow. And the buses are slow and unreliable. So without the MRT, it wouldn't be possible for many people to get where they need to go in a timely manner.
Also, I live in London now, and trust me when I say anyone who thinks Singapore's MRT fares are expensive will absolutely die of shock if they ever take the tube. Sometimes, though, the MRT just stops, and all of Singapore gets a collective heart attack. I remember my first time getting stuck on the MRT. It was sometime in July 2015 after I'd finished one of my final shifts at the business-to-business telemarketing firm I worked at. I was traveling home from my workplace after a quick dinner. I was looking forward to going home, having a shower, and slipping out to meet my then-girlfriend Geraldine, who lived a couple of MRT stops away from me. The trip home would have taken around half an hour, but it was rush hour, so there were no seats where I got on. I waited for someone to get off at Bugis, a popular shopping destination, and slipped into the seat. Feeling sort of tired, I put my earphones in, closed my eyes, and leaned forward on the small rucksack I carried to work. I woke up 15 minutes later, feeling sweaty from the sudden lack of air conditioning, and opened my eyes to a darkened carriage. Great, I thought, a breakdown. It wasn't the first time the MRT had broken down. The breakdowns had begun unexpectedly in 2011 and had only grown in frequency and severity since then. Still, I'd been lucky enough to never have been caught in one. I checked my phone, 75% charge and decent reception. I had a half-full bottle of water and no desire to use the toilet. I'd be fine, though I realized Joe Dean would probably be disappointed if this went on long enough. I took out my earphones, waiting for the announcement to come through the speakers. A voice with an air of forced cheerfulness came over the intercom, helpfully informing us that the train had stopped for a moment. Nice, calming, and delightfully non-specific. I didn't want to miss any more announcements in case they revealed something actually useful, so I couldn't put my earphones back in. There was like one light operating in the middle of each carriage, so I couldn't even read to pass the time. Amazing. I texted my parents to let them know I was all right, texted Geraldine to let her know I might not be able to make it, and checked Facebook and Twitter for the news. Thousands of angry Singaporean tweeters were yelling about yet another train breakdown. Most of them were putting the blame on random things, from the government to unspecified foreigners. What really caught my eye, though, was a video someone had posted on Twitter. Some guy had forced a train door open and gotten out into the tunnels, possibly intending to make his way to the nearest station. The person who'd uploaded the video was peering out at the tunnel, watching the idiot make his way into the dark, guided only by his phone's flashlight, before the guy suddenly turned and ran back into the train carriage. The video ended as the guy scrambled back in and began to shove the doors closed. At that time, I thought it was just him realizing just how stupid he was being. Walking through the dark in a train tunnel is not exactly my idea of safety. Still, I could understand what he was thinking. Several commuters in my carriage were starting to get antsy. An old man was grumbling about the government and how the growing number of foreign workers were allegedly responsible for train faults. Some children were crying while their mother yelled at them to shut up and then threatened to slap them if they didn't. A national serviceman was fidgeting in his boots in the middle of the carriage, no doubt angry that his book-out evening had been ruined by the disruption. I was hoping none of them had the same bright idea. With nothing to do, I leaned my head into my rucksack again and closed my eyes. Tap. Tap. What? That was a weird sound. It sounded like someone was tapping on the roof of the carriage. I looked around, but there didn't seem to be anyone doing that. A couple of people had briefly glanced up from their phones and, it seemed, had reached the same conclusion. I went back to sleep again, soothed by the weirdly comforting smell that I think bags get when you've used them enough. About a half an hour later, I woke up with a twinge in my shoulder. We were still in that same stretch of tunnel, not having moved a single centimeter. To relieve the pain, I pushed my shoulders and elbows against my seat and stretched my neck as far back as it would go, pressing the top of my head against the glass, and yawned. I heard a sudden scrabbling, and my eyes snapped open. Still leaning back, I saw something small, something white, pull itself over the top of the train. Tap, 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 tap. Fuck. I didn't want to tell anyone what I had seen because it would only cause needless panic. As long as the thing was on the roof tapping away, it wasn't in the carriage. Still, I offered my seat to the national serviceman after that. He had a beret in his pocket, and the crests on those were allegedly able to repel ghosts. Also, he was muscular and looked like he'd be decent in a fight. Either way, I figured we'd be safer if he was a tiny bit closer to whatever this was crawling out there. That day, 2 entire MRT lines went down, affecting over 400,000 people across Singapore. We spent another 2 hours trapped in that sweltering, besieged carriage. The tapping thing didn't show itself again, the only evidence of its presence being the occasional taps on the roof. I couldn't tell you where it went when the lights came on and the train finally started moving, nor could I tell you what it was, because I don't know those things either. But what I can tell you, though, is that in the news, the official explanation for the breakdown was a power fault.
It started with a bus chartered out of Austin. 12 high school cheerleaders and their coach were on their way to a national cheerleading competition. The bus they hired was from a reputable company who thoroughly screened their drivers. The driver was named Adam Abrams. The coach was an average housewife and mother of one of the girls on board. There was nothing out of the ordinary. A janitor saw them leave on a Thursday morning. The entire bus disappeared, along with its 14 inhabitants. I can assure you, a search was done of the entire Austin area as well as their route to the competition. There was no sign of them. They were last seen at a gas station about 60 miles out of Austin. The clerk said a man entered and bought a cup of coffee, but it was mostly sugar and milk. He paid for the drink and returned to the bus. Besides this one sighting, it was like the bus never existed. The first inclination was to blame the bus driver, but he had no criminal record. On all accounts, he seemed like a friendly man who liked his job. The thought was then that perhaps the bus had been held up or gotten into an accident, but no one could find the vehicle anywhere. A bus doesn't just go missing, it had to be out there somewhere. The local cops gave up on the case after a few months. The parents were crushed. They organized pathetic search crews, but of course, it turned up nothing. Within the next year, it happened again. This time, it was a school bus. What made this one especially odd was that the trip was only a few miles long. It was supposed to go from the school to the Austin Science Museum. There were 32 fifth graders on the bus, along with the chaperone, a teacher, and the driver, Doris Delhart. They left the school at 9 a.m. and were seen by many witnesses. They headed off and were never seen again. The two cases were nearly identical. The buses completely vanished out of thin air. No one could find the actual vehicles or the people inside. When the public buses started disappearing, the FBI had to get involved. It became a matter of public safety. The buses were disappearing about once a month. It was never the same bus or the route. It was impossible to know who exactly was on each bus, so they had to wait for missing persons reports to come in. The only thing they knew for sure were the drivers' names: Tanner Tate, Michael Mortensen, Paul Palmello, and the list goes on. Over 100 people were missing now. Over 30 buses were also gone. But that's not the strangest thing. The strangest thing is that people started forgetting. The parents of those 12 cheerleaders would look at the missing posters and no longer cry. The families of the fifth graders redecorated the bedrooms of their missing kids. People stopped knowing their lost friends. The community moved on, and even the fear of missing buses began to fade.
They took public transit just like they used to do. It's a nifty thing, time. It wipes clean the memories of human beings. Our memories, on the other hand, never go away. We never forget. This is helpful because we understand things, the inner core of everything we touch. When we select a group of humans, we never forget them. Even after their bodies have been experimented on and they are nothing but ash and a stain on the metal floor. But we have collected enough data on bus goers. There seems to be a certain type of human who uses public transfer or charters a bus. We have relocated our avatars in a new direction. We are moving on now, moving up, so to speak. So it is our recommendation that you stop taking public transportation. Taxis are so much more convenient, wouldn't you say?
I recently moved to the city, so I'm still not completely familiar with the ins and outs of how to use the subway. I work in Manhattan, but I've been crashing with a friend in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn until I can find my own place. After wandering out of a bar in Chelsea the other night, Flight 151 if anyone's interested, on certain nights, the bartender will flip a coin and if you call it correctly, you get a free drink. I got onto the downtown C train, dodged the other drunks to find a seat and was out like a light. I felt a little more sober when I woke up, but I was the only person in the subway car. The train must have just stopped because I heard the conductor ask for everyone to get off as this train was now out of service. Once I was on the platform, I tried to figure out where the hell I was. I didn't recognize the name of the station, and I didn't see a map or anything. I was starting to get a little freaked out because there wasn't anyone else on the platform. I was about to try and find the car with the conductor, but the train took off before I could locate him. I estimated that it must have been really late. My phone was dead, and I didn't see a clock. At that point, I decided to bite the bullet and just go up to the street and hail a cab. I'd have to deal with my friend making fun of me for getting lost later. As I walked to find the exit, I didn't notice anything strange about the station yet. There were just a couple of overflowing garbage cans on the platform and some more trash sitting in pools of disgusting subway water down in the tracks. It apparently had been a busy weekend. I didn't recognize the neighborhood when I was at the street level. I just saw a bunch of generic terraced brownstones. I could be anywhere in Brooklyn. I was seriously starting to get unnerved though, because I didn't see a single person out or light on. Granted, it was the middle of the night, but I didn't even see any cars coming down the street. I looked up to try and find at least the Empire State Building to use as a landmark to get my bearings, but I didn't see anything. I must have gone way too far. Worst of all was the absolute silence. I had been in the city for a few weeks, so I was already getting used to the constant barrage of noise. This sudden oral levity was making my head spin. I pulled the last cigarette out of my pack and lit it as I took in the strange surroundings. I dropped the empty pack out of frustration and started walking, hoping to find a cab. I had been moving for less than a minute when I realized the street I was walking down kept going straight as far as I could see. There were no cross streets, just rows of endless dark windowed brownstones and parked cars. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I started having trouble breathing. I thought maybe someone had slipped something in my drink, but I felt stone cold sober now. I looked over my shoulder, but all I saw were more endless brownstones and the subway entrance. I started walking, faster now. Even at this hour, there had to be at least a few night owls out and about, or at least watching TV in their apartments. But still, I saw nothing. I was starting to realize this block was impossibly long. I looked up at the brownstones and noticed for the first time, none of them had any numbers. And not only were there no side streets, the terraced houses had no alleyways between any of them. I finally saw the next subway station come into view and raced forward to hopefully find more people to ask where I was. The only thing I found was an empty subway entrance with an equally empty pack of Marlboros in front of it. In a panic, I ran up the stairs to the building on my right and looked for a buzzer to ring. Unable to find one, I started pounding on the door. Something was off.
There was a door at the top of the steps, but not really. I didn't feel wood under my fist, but just solid rock. There was no doorknob. Looking closer, I realized the wood door was fused to the rest of the building. I stepped back, shocked, and attempting to glance in the window, I just saw solid black. My head spun around, confirming the rest of the buildings were all the same. These didn't appear to be actual brownstones, just some sort of mass doing a crude impression of an apartment block. I almost threw up out of sheer confusion, and I darted back to the subway entrance. It was the only structure on this infinite block. I scrambled down the stairs and approached the turnstiles. I hadn't noticed before, but something was wrong with them too. There was no place to swipe my card, just smooth steel. I grabbed onto the turnstile arm to see if it had any give either way, but when I pulled back and forth, it was locked solid. This was especially confusing because I had just walked out through the turnstile minutes ago without a problem. I leaned in closer and saw there was no mechanism or machinery operating the turnstile arm. The whole apparatus looked as if it was cast as one solid block of metal. The buildings in this platform were just fake. I almost yelled out in shock when I heard a loud shrill. On the other side of the turnstiles, there was a column with a ringing payphone.
I jumped over the turnstile and dove for the phone. I grabbed the handle, but like everything else here, the payphone headset was just molded to the rest of the apparatus. The phone continued to ring as I pulled on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Finally, after a minute or so, the ringing stopped. I went to get a closer look at the phone. There were 12 buttons like on a normal payphone, but they weren't labeled. The black headset of the phone looked plastic, but felt like steel to the touch. There was a label on the top of the payphone that read ATT phone and a sticker on the side that read Dial 911 emergency. I sunk to the floor, clutching my head, trying to calm down. My back was to the column as I sat on the floor. At that point, the stress, confusion, and the fact that I'd been drinking earlier caused me to pass out. I legitimately thought I woke up in a normal subway station after a bad drug trip, what I can only assume was several hours later. But after standing up and tugging on the stubborn handle of the payphone, I realized I was still stuck in the phantom subway station. I saw daylight streaming down the stairs past the turnstile, so I jumped the barrier and went back to the street level. The sun was indeed up. It was about a quarter of a way from the highest point in the sky, roughly equivalent to mid-morning, or so I guessed. Right before I left my friend's apartment last night, I showered and shaved. I could now feel the beginning of stubble on my chin, the 5 o'clock shadow giving me a rough estimate of how long I'd been here. The sky was brilliant blue, not a cloud to be seen. It would have been a beautiful day if it wasn't for the fact that I was on the block from hell. In daylight, the neighborhood was every bit as creepy as it was during the night. There was still no signs of any other people. None of the sounds and smells of the city were evident. It was at this point I realized I was waking up after a night of drinking, and I was starting to feel the dehydration and hunger hit me. I started walking again, hoping to find something, anything to quench my thirst. Again, I just encountered formless brownstones. I started checking every door, but they were all the same. Just solid rock that looked like wood. After the first dozen, I just kept walking until I looped back to the subway entrance with my empty cig pack still standing guard. I approached the building on the right and tried to see how I could somehow scale the brownstone and get to the roof. I felt around the window ledge, but there wasn't enough room for me to get a grip and pull myself up. I had only been on a rock wall once, and I hadn't even made it close to the top. I didn't want to risk falling and breaking my back, at least not yet. I decided to take a closer look at the cars that lined the street. As I looked up and down the road, I realized there were actually only 4 different cars that just repeated: a red Jeep, a black town car, a gray Honda, and a navy coupe of some sort.
And of course, these weren't actual Jeeps, town cars, and Hondas, just the models that they appeared closest to. They lacked any sort of insignia or license plates. On closer inspection, the Hondas didn't have any door handles. The Jeeps had door handles, but inside the car, I could see there were no steering wheels. Not knowing what else to do, I walked back downstairs and jumped the turnstile. I sunk back down to my spot under the payphone. I was really starting to get thirsty now. My throat was parched and my eyes were welling up from panic. Would someone eventually find me, dead from dehydration and hunger in this place? I was worried I was going to hyperventilate, so I tried to catch my breath, breathing in through my nose, out through my mouth. My boss was a yoga freak and forced everyone in the office to meditate together in the conference room at the start of the day. I was actually a little thankful for this training now, as I was starting to feel slightly more calm. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Just as the absolute silence was off-putting, as I meditated, I realized I was missing another sense: smell. On any other day, an unattended subway station would have started to stink by now. Even the well-kept stations in Manhattan had a certain funk to them. But as I was breathing, I didn't smell anything. I opened my eyes, wiped away the small tears that had formed, and walked to the edge of the platform. There below me was trash sitting in pools of subway water runoff. No way, no freaking way I was going to drink that stuff. I must have stood there for at least 5 minutes debating what I should do, but eventually I jumped down onto the tracks. I was careful not to touch the third rail. I had no idea if it was electrified like its real-life counterpart. Getting my footing, I leaned down close to the dark pool and sniffed. Nothing. I turned my hand into a scoop and brought the liquid to my face. Knowing that I was eventually going to have to do this no matter what, I slurped the contents of my hand into my mouth. I was worried I was immediately going to throw up, but the liquid didn't taste or feel horrible in my mouth. It didn't quite have the consistency or lack of flavor of water, but it was somewhat similar. I honestly don't know how to describe this stuff other than sort of like water. I could only pray that bacteria wasn't festering in these pools. I grabbed an empty and dented red Coke can from beside the puddle. Actually, it said cork in gold lettering similar to the scrawl I was used to. It was larger than 12 ounces and the hole at the top was a rectangle. Either way, I dunked it into the pool and filled it up, bubbles coming to the surface as the can got heavier. I brought it to my mouth, taking deep gulps. I jumped back up to the platform, feeling slightly better. I didn't start immediately vomiting and having diarrhea, so I might be okay. I took another sip of the can and looked around. There were 2 trash cans piled high with garbage. I went to the one on the right to investigate. I was bolted to the floor, but I began sorting through the contents. There were a lot of Starbucks cups, but they were oblong and the logo was blue. They had names like Struffrux and Sartfrux. I set them aside. I kept going till I found a wadded up McRandall's bag, but it wasn't a paper bag. It had the consistency of aluminum foil. Inside, I found some fries, which I took a trepidous bite of. They were cold and chewy, but they tasted remarkably like real McDonald's fries. Score 1 for whoever built this place. At least they got one thing right. Now that I had some food and water in me, I sat back down under the payphone and started to think. This whole room was like a bad Xerox. The copycat that had built this place messed up a lot more things than he had gotten right. But my main concern was finding a way out. What was that expression about the rule of threes? A person can survive for 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. It seemed like I'd have enough air and water to last me for the immediate future. Food was going to be a problem though. Hopefully there were a few more scraps in the other garbage can. I decided to do an inventory of what I had to work with. First off, the stuff that I had on me when I arrived at the copycat station. 1 red big cigarette lighter, 1 dead iPhone in a cheap black case, 1 set of keys, a dime and a quarter, one wallet with $43 in assorted IDs and credit cards. I set these items out in front of me, plus my jeans, button-up shirt, plain white t-shirt, boxers, socks, sneakers, and a leather belt. I also had about a dozen assorted empty bottles from the first garbage can. I found a half-eaten granola bar in there as well. The second trash can ended up being a copy and paste from the first, so I had another bag of fries and another half-eaten granola bar. As hungry as I was, I decided to ration these for later. I sat on the platform trying to think my way out of this problem. Upstairs was just a loop of a fake Brooklyn street. I had a feeling that the incoming and outgoing train tracks would loop me back to this station too, though I'd have to check to be sure. I hopped down onto the tracks, avoided the puddle and the third rail, and started walking to my left. I did my best to avoid tripping on the wooden slats. There was only a narrow pathway on the side of the tracks. If this was any other station, I'd be worried about getting flattened by a train, but I had a feeling nothing was going to be coming down the tracks. I kept moving until I couldn't see the platform behind me, the dim tunnel being lit only by what was the equivalent of a small watt bulb every dozen feet. I tried to estimate how far it took to loop back on the street level and realized I should have arrived back at the platform by now if the tracks were the same situation. They either went somewhere else or it took longer to loop back. I started to get nervous, so I turned back around and eventually got back to the platform, finding everything just the way I left it.